I came across Resident Evil 2 in a trailer about 6 months before its release. I heard rumors about it at this point, and looked it up with a general interest in its popularity as a remake of a game known for being the best in the Resident Evil series. When I saw the trailer, instantly I thought this is not an action game like the previous entries. The lighting, the atmosphere, the tension, it was all there. When I finally saw the gameplay trailers months later, I thought to myself, they did it again. First RE7, now RE2 Remake? Are we on the cusp of a Resident Evil renaissance? It's clear horror has had some troubles over the last decade, what with formulaic movie jump scares, retreading of old concepts with new visuals, and let's not forget the abuse of the hiding mechanic. But we've seen the scares grow stronger with the release of the VR headsets, putting us closer than ever before to the fear in horror gaming. Now that we have a new avenue for horror fans, will we see a surge in popularity in the genre? This brings me to the purpose of this series. This is where I can share with you the search for my scariest hair-raising moments in video gaming. I hope that we may all discover our fears and examine the understanding behind them enough to really get the most enjoyment out of our favorite games. I decided this analysis format would help best with my understanding for fear in gaming. Most of this analysis will cover my personal experience of RE2 Remake played on the normal difficulty for both Campaign A with Claire and Campaign B with Leon. If there's anything I've missed, or if you'd like to share your experience with the game too, I'd love to discuss with you in the comments section, or join my Discord in the descriptions. Okay, let's get started. Here's a brief rundown of the topics we will be hitting in this analysis. I will be describing the atmosphere, tension, and general fear I experienced at certain points of the game involving the graphics, sound effects, story, and game mechanics. Afterwards, I'll provide a quick summary of the overall scare factor, how well it works together, and whether I'd recommend it to the average horror fan or not. Okay, to begin with, we have very impressive visuals coming from the new RE engine. I'm no fanatic, but I was surprised when watching the opening cutscenes thinking these facial animations had better acting skills than many of the Netflix horror movies as of late. As I said earlier, what immediately caught my eye were the stark contrasts in light when you first enter the gas station's office in the back. The zombies became grisly amalgamations, teetering between your vision inside the flashlight and the shadows around. I need to address this as well. I really stuck close to the menu's preferred brightness and contrast, keeping my sliders slightly off of the light and dark outlines so that I could experience the developer's original intention. I recall near the beginning inside the police station, my character Claire at the time first crawling under that metal shutter with the impediment of movement. She entered an unknown area after escaping into the safety of the station. I felt it, that deep unsettling tension as the flashlight scanned the floor and Claire slowly dug herself out from underneath the shutter. The flashlight design itself wasn't super impressive, but it worked well at uncovering many of the darkest corners. Really, the true beneficiary of the lighting contrast were the zombies, being able to cloak themselves and blend within the environment, waiting for the perfect moment to pop out at your least convenience. Truly, the stars of this game are only half-baked when encountering them in brighter areas. They seemed more like a bullet sponge target dummy that peeled like an orange when you shot them. But in the dark, when walking around the corner, only to be grabbed and ripped into by the shadowy figure afterwards, you scramble to focus the flashlight and your gunfire on the figure, just to see another pop out from the shadows behind it? Well done, Capcom. Zombies have been overdone for a decade now, but somehow my experience with RE2's remake's zombies was fresher than I had imagined. It hoped that the facial damage effects were so disgustingly real, and the side-to-side gait they shuffled in really unsettled me for some reason. I wonder if it has to do with my understanding of zombies stereotypically being mindless and unable to read its victims' actions before taking a bite of lunch. Thanks to George Romero and the over-encumbering amount of zombie flicks of the early 2000s, I was unprepared for this reimagining of the undead corpse. Hell, I'll give them the tanky bullet sponge effect worked great in their favor compared to the glass butterfly zombies of games like Left 4 Dead and Dead Rising. Sound is up next. To be honest, I was at first disappointed with the lack of soundtracks when I first played the game. I turned on the light in the first save room and was excited to hear the save room theme playing, until it disappeared, and that was really the only notable theme besides Mr. X's theme, which I believe worked more as an array of sound effects. I'm saying there really isn't a whole lot of music, and that's fine since they really made up for it with their sound design. So when I saw the trailer unveiling Mr. X, I was disappointed again. At this point, I was already accustomed to the main character's voice acting, and was let down by their incessant cussing at every jump scare reaction. Although in the final release I went through the game not noticing these reactions, so it didn't damage my playthrough as I originally thought it would. And at the time of the trailer, I was worried the sound effects from Mr. X would go in the same direction, a lazy mess. Boy, was I wrong. After extinguishing the fire from the helicopter on the roof, I entered the hallway the chopper crashed into. The moment Mr. X lifted the helicopter, I remember this pitch drop coming from a heavy bass, the sound filling my headphones as my ears fell from the top of Mount Olympus. I felt gravity shake me like a salt shaker as he stomped his way towards me, so I paused the game and went and got a snack. I just remember the tension building after each thud of his size 17 boot stomps. This was my first recognizable experience with the binaural audio that I can recall. It was easy to tell the direction Mr. X came from, hearing his footsteps from far off as it slowly grew louder the closer he got. It was even more nerve-wracking to hear him walk up on me from an adjacent room where I would usually end up packing up whatever I was doing and scram. There were a couple of spots I remember having difficulty telling the difference of direction the footsteps came from, like under the stairs by the first save room. Since it was impossible to tell if he was coming from upstairs or the nearby hallway, I always just waited by the save room to see if he was coming to me or moving away, which killed the immersion a bit. Mr. X showed the sound design was as effective as I hoped it would be. Another enemy which surprised me was the liquor. I remember in the basement near the morgue, a room filled with liquors, and my only passage through was the middle of their hangout. I walked lightly, knowing from previous encounters that gunshots or running would alert their full attention. The lickers still managed to hear my lightest of footsteps, and as I made my way through the room, one licker stalked me so close that I was sweating bullets. The tension was great. I loved that the sound wasn't loud enough that the licker outright attacked me, but was just enough for it to invade my personal space so relentlessly. I do wish there was a mechanic to tiptoe or walk so soft that the lickers would barely sense you, or not sense you at all, since I felt they did too good of a job stalking you, so it seemed more like enemy magnets. But the audio trick was overall a great effort. You can imagine the amount of stress when faced with lickers and zombies, and hell, throw in Mr. X and now you have a real party. Some of the lesser recognized moments involving sound design were when you finish solving the clock tower puzzle, and the ground shakes from the bell ringing, so the puzzle piece falls within reach. And the bell sound made me tense, since leading to the attic, it's pretty quiet up there, so I thought for sure the bell would alert Mr. X, which made me slightly paranoid. Considering this is a remake of Resident Evil 2, including all of the main story elements, I went into this thinking, again, there weren't going to be many surprises. Although the story does seem to follow a similar pace in plot development, escaping the city to reach the police station, discovering the underground exit with the help of Marvin, then discovering the G-Virus and Birkin in the sewers, only to find the lab and set off the self-destruct button. I didn't expect characters to be as fleshed out as they were. Marvin played a similar role to his character from the original. Seeing him go from a relatively capable injured cop who kills a zombie for you in the beginning, then slowly growing weaker as you check in with him from time to time, and as you discover the underground escape route, he sends you on your way to face Birkin, only to return later and find he became the brainless meat sack hungering for your flesh, just like the ones you've spent the entire game killing. Marvin had principles, the justice he upheld as a cop. He had humanity, family, and friends, and all of it was slowly stripped from him as he fell further into his infection. He realized he would soon be attacking your character, so he detached from your journey when he understood he couldn't help any longer. Outside of that disturbing premise, it was really interesting how when you first arrived at the station, there seemed to be some semblance of authority left. The cop in the hall you located on the computer, along with Marvin, and even Chief Irons was perceived as a protector of the station. The station was still alive with people willing to fulfill their duty to protect fellow humans. That sense of protection quickly dwindles as you learn more of the outbreak while exploring the station. Finding the remains of officers, their final notes to you or your would-be fellow officers, and even the memorabilia they left behind made it seem they were only there just hours or even minutes ago. And thinking about how easily their defenses were broken and all that firepower they had were worthless in the fight against the undead really brought a disturbing atmosphere to the game. There was a sense of loneliness wandering through the station without coming into contact with a single soul. And no matter my efforts to clear the undead and solve each puzzle, I was reminded that throughout my path, I would have easily ended up the final note in some office, or the leftover bodies from the lickers meals. I also felt this loneliness and hopelessness while in the orphanage as Sherry. The orphanage, we learned through document files, seemed to be an undercover site for testing human children for Umbrella. That alone made me uncomfortable, let alone reading the diaries explaining the disappearance of kids in the orphanage and the lies Chief Irons told the city to keep the secret under control. Add in the fact that Chief Irons is a murderer who likes to preserve dead bodies as if they were hunting trophies, and you have a pretty messed up setting. I was dreading each step towards Chief Irons' embalming office, as Sherry had made the context of this setting even more hopeless, seeing as her mother abandoned her and her father was walking around as an 8-foot mutated creature, killing everything in sight. Claire and Leon, on the other hand, had more active roles with their ability to fight back and defend themselves and others. That leads me to Claire and Leon's perspective throughout the campaign. The game did a good job of showing the incompetence of our protagonists early on. When Claire and Leon first took on the zombie in the back room of the gas station, you could tell they were hesitant as hell. When they first entered the police station and dragged the police officer from under the shutter, you could tell they were out of their element. The developers kept the progression of Leon and Claire slow and steady with fear until it eventually led towards an action aesthetic. When they discovered William Birkin at first, they were thrown off, but knew Birkin was like the other enemies, and so they dealt with him without much hesitation. Claire grew in character to protect Sherry, along with her promise to bring Sherry to Annette, Sherry's mother. And after getting her to Annette, Claire realized Annette couldn't protect Sherry any better than her and took Annette's place as Sherry's guardian. Leon grew in character to work with the CIA to retrieve the G-Virus, though he ends up being manipulated by Ada to grab the G-Virus for herself, but he eventually is able to detach his emotions from her and do the right thing. From a story perspective, This keeps the pacing fresh and the characters interesting enough to see the story through to the end. Here is where I disagree with many RE fans. Claire and Leon are not the best avenues to experience horror through. The reason being the same problem these characters had in earlier RE titles, and the same problem I see in similar recurring characters in horror series such as Isaac Clarke, the protagonist from Dead Space. These are action character archetypes. I admit it's easy to see them in this light considering their past encounters in other RE titles, or future encounters following the in-game timeline, such as Code Veronica or RE4. This is the best iteration of Claire and Leon, where their action-oriented progression is less apparent to make room for the feelings of hesitation, fear, and loneliness in the characters' experience along their journey. Real struggle is shown in Claire and Leon when they face off against the apocalypse. Their control is sluggish, their aim is slow to react. They have instances of hesitation and fear, such as when they react to the zombie coming at them and hear the cussing under their breath. Leon becomes easily manipulated when Ada senses his young demeanor of upholding justice. These were great additions to the characters that we hadn't seen in the previous installment, but it didn't really slow down the action that Capcom seems to invigorate their characters with. Claire's face-off with the second-to-last form of Birkin by jumping straight into the fray after Annette warned her of her imminent death at the hands of the G-Virus, and leaving Sherry alone in her wake just shows how ballsy the characters of Resident Evil are. Resident Evil's always having a hard time progressing their main characters into anything but the ultimate badass. Even their proclaimed scariest entry, RE7, managed to turn their faceless average Joe, Mr. Ethan Winters, into the ultimate killer with an array of firepower enough to take down an army of dead. I agree that a lot of it has to do with the game mechanics, not knowing what to do with the hundreds of rounds you stored up during your playthrough. But when Ada is seen taking out Mr. X by running him over with a SWAT truck, and proceeds to explode the truck with a press of a button, only then to spurt a quick one-liner, "Nothing dies down here," it hurt my impression of Mr. X, who I saw as this indestructible force. When Leon first met the reporter in the jail cell, we saw Mr. X burst through the wall with his fist and pop the reporter's head like a balloon. But after seeing him get so easily defeated during the story numerous times, I couldn't help but think our main characters are maybe a tad overpowered. Maybe that's the problem Resident Evil has with their characters, is how does a protagonist survive the horrors of the game and not become a steroid-using musclehead that punches giant boulders across the screen by the end of the game? And I commend Capcom for recognizing this with the past two games. It's a start. Re2 Remake seems familiar to older entries in the franchise, like RE1, 2, and 3 in terms of game design. It has a very similar layout in terms of puzzle areas, going from room to either clear zombies or pick up the next key for discovering more rooms. In this fashion, I think RE2 Remake does a great job of presenting a puzzle layered as a supplement for building tension. The idea of putting most of your focus on solving puzzles while traversing from point A to point B really lets you take the focus off of the horror elements long enough to get caught off guard and jump scared while encountering enemies along the way. For example, as I was moving the shelves in the library into order, I completely forgot Mr. X was a couple of rooms behind me, so as I was in the middle of the shelf moving animation, Mr. X walked up behind me and threw me across the room. It was instances like these that scared me the most, concentrating on the puzzles only to have a zombie or licker pop up to eat my brains. Another moment in the game where the puzzle solving left me in tension hell was solving the statue in the attic where you blow up the blockade with the C4. I was very fixated on solving the puzzle, and after spending much time in confusion, I figured it out and went to exit the blockaded area when a licker showed up right across from me and caught me while I was running. He dove and swiped at me from the ceiling, which sent my orientation into panic mode as I jumped the camera in circles. Just the idea of feeling the achievement and relief of crossing another puzzle off of my list to all of a sudden getting ripped half to death out of nowhere was terrifying. This brings me to another design in the game that wasn't as apparent in Campaign A, but was brought to the forefront in Campaign B: the subversion of expectations. See, after my encounter with the liquor in the attic, like any good rule-abiding gamer, I carried the memory of this encounter into Campaign B with Leon. So when I expected to see the liquor after finishing the puzzle, there was none to be found. So I slowly crept out from the blockade area with my pump shotgun ready at hand. Nothing still. I crept all the way downstairs to make sure I wasn't just hallucinating, and that in itself was a great employment of the subversion technique. This was done in a few other areas of Campaign B, such as the starting location for Leon and going through different rooms using new puzzles and key items. My other favorite subversion of my expectations was in the room before the morgue. The introduction of the zombie dogs were light and forgettable in Claire's campaign, but encountering them here in their cages threw me off slightly. I went to each cage and shot those zombie dogs dead. After my varying encounters with Mr. X and the Lickers, I knew that leaving zombies alone when it seemed they couldn't get to you was an easy design ploy for the devs to throw them at you later. So I was quite secure knowing I ruined the game's plan to throw these dogs back in my face later, until they spawned in the breaker room right after I solved the power puzzle. And they wouldn't just spawn in to run straight at my face. They would be stuck behind a fence, and I would question for a second if they were stuck on the other side, until before I knew it, they would jump over the fence straight for my face. These design choices ultimately made for a really exciting second playthrough. The idea of maintaining a similar setting for the player to feel they have the advantage only to make them doubt if they truly learned from their first playthrough is a great experience in its own right. Let's not brush the fact the game garnered very high expectations after gamers learned it would be a remake. Remakes in this franchise are held to high standards, which in no doubt is a result of Resident Evil 1 Remake being a masterpiece in many fans' eyes. The road leading to Re2 Remake's release was a bumpy one filled with plenty of doubts from old school fans, seeing the removal of fixed camera perspectives and tank controls would ultimately lose the spirit of the original, while new school fans saw the sluggish combat, the retreading of familiar puzzles, and linear game design would lack the excitement that other games of this generation have. I had a great time experiencing this game. Although I thought RE7 brought more moments of fear to the table, I believe the dichotomy of puzzle and horror in this game brought a revitalized and tasteful approach to the series that seemed long lost among older titles. And the sound and presentation really seemed to be pushing the limits of present-day gaming. I believe the average horror fan would find plenty to enjoy in this game. It isn't overwhelmingly scary, and the story has been done before, but when it is scary, it's a blast from the past, present, and future. I usually have this game in my top 10 list of horror games, as it gave me a thrilling ride that I can return to for plenty of moments of tension, atmosphere, and fear that feels fresh again and again. Capcom as of late has had a classic anime-style redemption arc, and if they keep this going, we may never have to worry about a horror game dry spell. I'd like to take a moment to thank everyone who took the time to watch my content. It means a lot knowing there are people who also really enjoy horror games, and this is a first of many to come, so I truly am excited to bring you along on this journey. If you enjoyed your time here, click the lick button if you're a licker, or subscribe if you use a zombie. Until next time, see ya.